Romulan destroyer never saw the human ship coming until plasma cannons blasted gaping holes in its hull. 800,000 years after they destroyed Earth, the alien scum were finally going to pay. The Romulans thought humans were extinct. They were wrong. Dead wrong. In the cockpit of the battered old warship, a man named Kyle Baker gripped the controls and gritted his teeth. The view screen showed the shattered remnants of the solar system he once called home. Where Earth used to be, there was nothing but an asteroid field and echoes of a long-lost civilization. Kyle was a soldier, one of the last survivors of the human race. Like the others, he had been kept alive for centuries through cryogenic stasis, waiting for the day when humanity would finally have its revenge against the Romulans. The history of their conflict had been passed down from generation to generation, a somber story of tragedy and loss. Without provocation or warning, the technologically superior Romulans had appeared in Earth's skies and bombarded the planet from orbit until its surface was a burning hellscape. The remnants of humanity had fled to the stars, but the Romulans hunted them relentlessly across the galaxy. One by one, the last human colonies were found and destroyed. The Romulans wanted to erase humanity from existence. But they didn't get all of us, Kyle thought grimly as his ship, a patchwork of scavenged weapons and reverse-engineered tech, sped toward Romulan space. They didn't count on our tenacity, our will to survive. We've been a mere footnote in galactic history for too long. Now it's time to make the Romulans remember our name. Through great effort and sacrifice, Kyle had gathered vital intel on the Romulan Empire and assembled a crew of humans and mercenaries, all hungry for payback. Their mission was as simple as it was audacious. Strike at the heart of Romulan power. Remind them that humanity will never forget or forgive the genocide committed against them. Prove that 800 millennia wasn't enough to exterminate the human spirit. Kyle knew how high the odds were stacked against him. The Romulans' technology and empire had only grown stronger over the centuries. They were now the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. Most didn't even believe humans still existed. That element of surprise was the only real advantage Kyle had. As Romulus came into view, its cities glittering with obscene wealth and power, Kyle addressed his ragtag crew over the shipwide comms. "I won't lie to you," he said, his voice hard. "This mission is damn near suicidal. The Romulans will hit us with everything they've got. But this is about more than revenge. It's about taking back our future, about proving that humanity won't go quietly into the night. We may not survive the day, but I promise that the Romulans will never forget it." The bridge erupted into cheers and battle cries. Kyle closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. So many questions still haunted him. Why did the Romulans commit such total genocide against Earth all those centuries ago? The fragmentary historical records gave no clear answers, only hinting at some terrible secret. Kyle shook his head. It didn't matter now. All that mattered was justice, no matter the cost. He throttled the engines to max and set a collision course for the Romulan homeworld. Today, the galaxy would learn that humanity was still a force to be reckoned with. Even if none of them survived, Kyle would make damn sure their sacrifice lit the fires of vengeance across the stars. One way or another, the Romulans would pay for what they did to Earth. Kyle would see to that, even if it was the last thing he ever did. As they closed in on Romulus, a sudden distress signal from a nearby moon caught their attention. Kyle hesitated for a moment. Every second counted if they were going to catch the Romulans off guard. But something about the signal felt important. He made the call to investigate. What they found on that moon shook them to their core. A hidden Romulan research facility, filled with the screams and sobbing of human captives. The few sorry souls the Romulans had kept alive for their twisted experiments. Kyle and his crew stormed the facility, plasma rifles blazing, cutting down the shocked Romulan guards. In the chaos of the firefight, Kyle kicked open a cell door to find a dozen emaciated children cowering in the dark. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes fell on a young boy with haunted eyes that looked just like his son's. The boy stared back at him, recognition slowly dawning on his gaunt face. "I'm Janus," the boy said hoarsely. "Are you here to rescue us?" Kyle nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He held out a hand and Janus took it, his grip surprisingly strong. Together, they led the other children out of the nightmarish prison. As his crew picked through the smoldering ruins of the facility, Kyle pored over the data they'd stolen from the Romulan servers. What he found made his blood run cold. This was no mere prison. It was a research lab. The Romulans had been experimenting on their human captives, trying to isolate specific genes, turn human DNA into a weapon. This was bigger than revenge, bigger than Kyle had ever imagined. Janus peered over his shoulder, eyes widening at the complex streams of data. Genetic recombination, he murmured, pointing at a string of code. Forced evolutionary acceleration. They're trying to remake us, remake themselves. Kyle looked at the boy in astonishment. How do you know all this? What did they do to you? Janus just shook his head. Before Kyle could press him further, alarms started blaring. A Romulan patrol had found them. Kyle raced to the cockpit, shouting for his crew to prepare for battle. They came out guns blazing, the Romulan ships swarming them like angry hornets. Consoles sparked and smoke filled the air as Kyle wrenched the controls, trying desperately to evade the onslaught. A lucky shot punched through their shields, sending the ship careening towards a nearby planet. "Brace for impact!" Kyle roared, praying there would be something left of them to impact. Miraculously, they didn't end up as a tragic smear on the planet's surface. The ship plowed into the dirt in a screech of rending metal, skidding to a halt in an ugly gash of earth. Kyle dragged himself out of the wreckage, every bone in his body aching, and stared out at an achingly familiar landscape of ruins and dust. "Where are we?" Janus asked, appearing beside him. "Home," Kyle said quietly, "or what's left of it. This was a human colony once." As the crew hauled themselves out of the ship and started assessing the damage, Kyle put a hand on Janus's thin shoulder. "I need your help, kid. I need you to help me understand what the Romulans are after." Together, they sifted through the stolen data. Fragments at first, bits and pieces that slowly formed a terrifying picture. The Romulans believed that somewhere in the shattered remains of Earth lay an artifact of immense power, something that predated even humanity's rise to the stars. They called it the progenitor, and they would tear the galaxy apart to find it. Kyle felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. All this time, all this suffering, it was never just about hate. It was about fear. The Romulans feared what humanity could become, what they could take from them. He rose to his feet, ancient joints cracking. This changed everything. Earth wasn't just a graveyard anymore. It was the key to humanity's future, and he'd be damned if he let the Romulans get there first. As they soared away from the ruins of the colony, Kyle caught a flicker of movement in the view screen. A ship decloaking in a shimmer of light. His heart sank as he saw the distinctive predatory lines of a Romulan hunter-killer, built for speed and death. At its helm stood a towering figure in black armor, his eyes glowing with malevolent augmented light. He stared straight at Kyle through the screen and smiled a blade's-edge smile. "Run, little human," he purred. "Run to your precious Earth, but you cannot escape the eyes of Thrakus. I will find you, and I will leave your corpse for the carrion." The screen went black. Kyle felt cold dread settling in his gut. He'd just made an enemy, perhaps the most dangerous one yet. But there was no turning back now. Earth awaited, and with it, a reckoning 800,000 years in the making. Kyle's ship limped through the asteroid field, engines sputtering. The crew worked frantically to patch hull breaches as they navigated the debris of their shattered solar system. Kyle gripped the controls, sweat beading on his brow as he dodged chunks of rock that could spell their doom. "Sir, we're picking up an energy signature," called out the sensor officer. "It's coming from Mars." Kyle frowned. "Mars? There's nothing left of Mars?" But as they approached the red planet, now little more than a misshapen husk, the readings grew stronger. Kyle ordered a closer pass, and that's when they saw it, a shimmering distortion in the Martian landscape. It's cloaked, Janus said, eyes wide. Ancient human tech. Has to be. Kyle made the call. They'd investigate. It could be their only lead on the progenitor. The descent to the Martian surface was harrowing. Storms of red dust battered their shuttle as Kyle fought for control. They touched down hard, the landing struts groaning in protest. Kyle led a small team into the howling wind, Janus at his side. The boy's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the alien landscape. There, Janus pointed, a flicker in the air, barely visible. They approached cautiously. As they drew near, the air seemed to part, revealing a massive doorway etched with symbols Kyle recognized from Earth's most ancient ruins. Inside, they found a treasure trove beyond imagining. Holograms sprang to life, showing visions of Earth as it once was. Kyle watched, transfixed, as the story of the progenitor unfolded before them. It was split into 3 pieces, Kyle muttered, and one of them is here. But claiming their prize wouldn't be easy. As they ventured deeper, the facility came alive around them. Lasers lanced out from hidden emitters. The floor dropped away beneath their feet. Only Janus's quick thinking and seemingly innate understanding of the ancient systems kept them alive. At last, they reached the vault. Inside sat a pulsing crystalline structure that hurt to look at directly, the Martian component of the progenitor. Kyle reached for it, heart pounding. Then the world exploded. Thrakus and his Romulan soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons blazing. Kyle and his team dove for cover, returning fire desperately. "We can't let them take it," Kyle shouted over the din of battle. He locked eyes with Janus and nodded. The boy understood. While Kyle provided covering fire, Janus raced to a nearby control panel. His fingers flew over the ancient interface. Alarms blared. The facility began to shake. "Self-destruct activated!" Janus yelled. Kyle snatched up the progenitor component and ran. His team followed, Thrakus hot on their heels. They sprinted through collapsing corridors as the ancient structure tore itself apart around them. They reached their shuttle just as the ground began to give way. Kyle punched the engines, rocketing them skyward as a massive sinkhole consumed the Martian landscape below. But their troubles weren't over. Their ship had taken heavy damage in the firefight. As they limped away from Mars, Kyle saw the toll the battle had taken. Good people lost, resources depleted. And Thrakus was still out there. The Romulan commander's ship hung in the distance like a bird of prey. Kyle knew the hunter had gotten away with valuable data on the progenitor. It was a race now, a desperate scramble to reach Earth and find the next component before Thrakus could. Kyle set their course, acutely aware of the weight on his shoulders. The fate of humanity itself might well depend on what they did next. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Kyle clenched his fists. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would see this through. For Earth, for humanity, for revenge. Kyle's battered ship limped through the debris field surrounding Earth, its hull creaking ominously. The crew worked frantically to patch breaches and reroute power as they approached their ancestral home. "Sensors picking up signs of habitation," the tactical officer called out. "Looks like New York City?" Kyle leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the console. The ruins of towering skyscrapers jutted from the scarred landscape like broken teeth, but nestled among them was something unexpected, a cluster of structures that showed signs of recent activity. As they touched down on the outskirts of the ruined metropolis, Kyle led a small team to investigate. They moved cautiously through the rubble-strewn streets, weapons at the ready. Suddenly, figures emerged from the shadows, humans, clad in patchwork armor, their faces weathered and wary. At their head stood a tall woman with steely eyes and close-cropped gray hair. "I'm Samara," she said, her voice rough. "Who the hell are you people?" Kyle stepped forward. "I'm Kyle, we're from the stars." Samara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible. Humanity was wiped out centuries ago." "Not all of us," Kyle replied. Samara regarded them suspiciously, but led them to a hidden entrance. As they descended into the underground outpost, Kyle marveled at the ingenuity of these survivors. They'd cobbled together a functional base from the remnants of old tech and scavenged parts. But it was clear their systems were failing. Janus stepped forward, his young face alight with curiosity. He placed a hand on a sputtering control panel, and suddenly the lights stabilized, systems humming to life. Samara stared in amazement. "How did you?" Janus shrugged. "It's not so different from the old Martian tech." Kyle saw the change in Samara's demeanor. She nodded slowly. "Maybe you really are who you say you are. Come on, I'll show you what we know about the Romulans." In a dimly lit war room, Samara laid out the grim situation. The Romulans had established a fortified citadel in the heart of old Manhattan. They were stripping the planet bare, searching for something. "The progenitor," Kyle muttered. Samara's head snapped up. "You know about that?" Kyle nodded grimly. "We need to get into that citadel." What followed was a flurry of planning. Samara's rebels would launch an all-out assault on the Romulan perimeter, drawing their forces away. Meanwhile, Kyle, Janus, and a small team would slip inside. The night of the raid, chaos erupted across the ruins of New York. Explosions lit up the sky as the rebels engaged the Romulans in a fierce firefight. Kyle's team used the confusion to infiltrate the citadel. They descended into a vast underground complex, passing labs filled with twisted experiments. Kyle's stomach churned at the sight of mutilated human remains. In a cavernous chamber, they found what they were looking for: an enormous scanning array, its energy focused on a specific point deep beneath the earth. "There," Janus whispered, pointing to a readout. "Cairo, that's where the next component is hidden." As Kyle downloaded the crucial data, alarms blared. They turned to find themselves face to face with Thrakus and his elite guard. "Did you really think you could steal from me?" the Romulan commander snarled. The ensuing battle was brutal. Kyle's team fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Good people fell as they clawed their way to freedom. Finally, they burst out of the citadel, racing for their ship. As they lifted off, Kyle saw the Romulan armada mobilizing in pursuit. With their ship barely holding together and a Romulan fleet hot on their heels, Kyle set course for Cairo. The weight of their losses hung heavy, but there was no time to mourn. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, now rested on what they would find buried beneath the sands of Egypt. Kyle's ship screamed through Earth's atmosphere, hull plates glowing red-hot from the friction. Alarms blared as the battered vessel shuddered and groaned. "We're coming in too hot," shouted the pilot, hands dancing across controls. Kyle gripped his seat. "Just get us down in one piece." They plummeted towards the sprawling ruins of Cairo, jagged spires of ancient skyscrapers jutting from endless dunes. Romulan warships pursued relentlessly, plasma bolts sizzling past. "Janus, what do you see?" Kyle called out. The young man's eyes were fixed on his scanner. There, massive energy readings beneath the surface, some kind of shielding. As they neared the ground, Kyle barked orders. "All hands, prepare for immediate ground assault. We need that perimeter secured yesterday." The ship slammed down hard, kicking up a massive cloud of sand. Hatches burst open and Kyle's crew poured out, weapons at the ready. They fanned out around a nondescript patch of desert, taking cover behind crumbling walls and rusted vehicles. "Here they come," someone shouted. The sky lit up as Romulan ships opened fire. Searing beams of energy lanced down, vaporizing sand and stone. Kyle's people returned fire, but their weapons seemed pitiful against the onslaught. "We need to get below ground," Kyle yelled over the din. "Find the entrance." Samara appeared at his side, face streaked with sweat and grime. "My people are searching, but that shielding is masking everything." A deafening explosion rocked the battlefield. Kyle looked up to see a Romulan cruiser descending, its hull crackling with energy. In a flash of light, Thrakus and his warriors materialized on the sand. "Damn it," Kyle cursed. "Janus, we need that entrance now." But before the boy could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to rumble and shake. A massive sinkhole opened up, swallowing combatants from both sides. Kyle tumbled into darkness, the sounds of battle fading above him. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Kyle found himself in a vast underground chamber. Ancient machinery hummed all around, pulsing with eerie light. "Kyle," Janus called out, scrambling to his feet nearby. "We made it!" But their triumph was short-lived. Plasma bolts sizzled past, forcing them to dive for cover. Thrakus and his warriors had followed them down, and now the labyrinthine complex echoed with the sounds of furious combat. Kyle and Janus raced through twisting corridors, desperately searching for the central vault. Behind them, they heard the screams of their comrades falling to Romulan weapons. "No!" Samara's voice rang out, cut short by a burst of weapons fire. Kyle's heart clenched, but he pressed on. They had come too far to fail now. Suddenly, Janus skidded to a halt, his eyes wide. "Kyle, I have an idea. The Martian component. We can use it to overload the complex's systems." "But that could destroy everything," Kyle protested. Janus nodded grimly. "I know, but it's our only chance." Before Kyle could argue further, Janus was sprinting towards a nearby control panel. "Go!" the boy shouted. "Find the vault. I'll buy you time." Kyle hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran. The sounds of battle grew louder as he raced deeper into the complex. Finally, he burst into a massive chamber dominated by a towering crystalline obelisk. The progenitor. Kyle reached out, his fingers inches from its pulsing surface. "Not so fast, human." Kyle spun to find Thrakus standing in the doorway, his armor scorched and dented. The Romulan commander raised his weapon. "You've led me on quite a chase," Thrakus snarled, "but it ends here." Kyle lunged forward, tackling Thrakus to the ground. They grappled fiercely, trading savage blows. Kyle felt ribs crack under the Romulan's inhuman strength, but he fought on with the desperation of a cornered animal. Finally, Kyle managed to pin Thrakus, raising a jagged piece of metal for a killing blow. But before he could strike, the air shimmered and a familiar voice called out, "Kyle, stop!" He froze, staring in disbelief at the flickering image of Janus that had appeared before him. "The progenitor," the hologram said urgently. "It's not a weapon. It's knowledge, Kyle. The key to saving our people." Kyle's hand trembled. "But after everything they've done—" "I know," Janus said softly. "But this is bigger than revenge. We have a chance to rebuild, to become something greater. Don't throw that away." Kyle looked down at Thrakus, seeing the fear in the Romulan's eyes. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "What do I do?" he asked. "Activate the progenitor," Janus instructed. "It will show you the way." With a deep breath, Kyle reached out and touched the obelisk. Energy surged through him, images flashing before his eyes, countless human colonies hidden and waiting, a network spanning the stars. A pulse of power rippled outward, washing over Romulan and human alike. Weapons fell silent. The complex shuddered, ancient machinery whirring to life. Kyle staggered outside, clutching the now unified progenitor. Around him, dazed survivors from both sides picked themselves up from the sand. In orbit, the Romulan fleet was in disarray, their ships drifting aimlessly. He looked out over the ruins of Cairo, feeling the weight of all that had been lost. But for the first time in centuries, Kyle allowed himself to hope.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.